It has been a privilege to be invited to deliver the Professor E.C.Antony Memorial Lecture at the Professor Achyutamenan Government College, Thrissur. I thank the principal, Dr. Ramya, the head of the Postgraduate Department of English, Professor Anne Placid, Dr. Razina Mustafa, my technology specialist, Professor P.K. Prakash, who is a kind of patron saint of the faculty, as I understand, Professor Shanmugha Das, whom I met, students, faculty, members of the family of Professor Antony. It is indeed a coincidence that I thought of speaking on WBH. And later I learned from Professor Prakash that Yeats was also the subject of Professor Antony's doctoral thesis. I also understand that great stalwarts have delivered this oration before me, which makes me feel humble. I wish to congratulate the college for celebrating the 50th year, the golden jubilee of its inception. It's indeed a proud moment for the faculty retired and serving, the alumni, the present generation of students. I wish the college all glory in future too. I dedicate this lecture to my two great teachers, Professor M.S. Doraiswamy and Professor V.S. Sethuraman, who initiated me, and my great friend Professor Sriraman, who has also joined, and a whole generation of youngsters, scholars, students, showing how to read literature and what it is to be a dedicated, committed academic. I'm speaking on William Butler Yeats. I've given the title. In the title, you have the image of the phoenix. Phoenix is a mythical bird which is supposed to die and from its ashes rise again. So I thought of it because Yeats was just moving from one kind of way of writing to another. He was almost given up and then he came up almost till the end of his life. We'll come to that soon. W.B. Yeats was born of an Anglo-Irish ancestry of Protestant persuasion. The Anglo-Irish Protestants were in a minority, but they ruled over Ireland and the majority Roman Catholics. You know very well the long struggle, almost till recently. But Mr. Yeats chose to support the Irish nationalist movement, despite its differing religion and also the Celtic revival. For some, he was a seer, a visionary, but he was also equally canny, competent, warm-blooded, and what is worse, which is the subject of most of my talk today, eternally young at heart. Between these two sides of his nature, the earthy and the ethereal, there was a tension, and it is this tension that made him a poet. For it was an article of belief with Yeats that all life and all art grew out of and lived upon conflict. The word often occurring in his writing is antinomies, A-N-T-I-N-O-M-I-E-S, a sustained tension of opposites. He wrote in Anima Hominis. I like this quotation very much because it goes so deep into your consciousness. He says, we make out of the quarrel with others rhetoric, but of the quarrel with ourselves poetry. Let me repeat this quotation. We make out of the quarrel with others rhetoric, but of the quarrel with ourselves poetry. So there are two levels at which we come to contact with reality. One is the external world, which produces probably the best rhetoric in you. And there can be self-deception in rhetoric. But out of your own conflict with yourself, you produce produce poetry, poetry surges out of you because there is no place for self-deception in spirituality and in poetry. You remember Matthew Arnold's famous statement, you see, in poetry and in spirituality, there cannot be any charlatanism, he said, in cultural anarchy. So, it is often said that Yeats started by being a romantic and ended up as a modern poet. One may say that in the early 20th century context, romantic had a pejorative association and modern was a term of compliment. But truth seems to transcend labels, as my teachers taught me. It won't be an exaggeration if one claims that the history of the development of Yeats's poetry is the history of development of modern poetry, especially from late 19th century to the war period, Second World War period. For he subsumed in himself all the changing trends and could master them all. He was more than the sum of the parts, to use famous phrase of Samuel Taylor Coleridge. We tend to think that the 20th century had been predominantly anti-romantic. If, however, Romanticism means, as it ought to, something energetic, complete, prophetic, creative, consisting in an urge to fuse with the help of the imagination, the opposites, and transcend or pass beyond all known and fixed forms and premature modes of conceptualization, and an attempt to crystallize the experiences in their entirety in an image or a poem. If this is Romanticism, then we shall say that the whole modernist movement, starting with Imagism, is romantic in essence, in as much as it tries to reconcile the irreconcilables. Yeats and Eliot are romantic. You think of Eliot's poems like Ariel, Mariana, Parts of Wasteland, very few, and Parts of Four Quartets. They are romantic at their best moments in their poetry. In this sense, Yeats's poetry, more than even Eliot's, both from the point of view of range and its development, sums up the history of modern movement. Yeats started well in the central romantic tradition, with its emphasis on imagination and its antipathy towards science and rationality. This may be called the first stage, a period of integration. When you're young, you feel integrated. Yeats was writing a dreamy, wavering, subjective kind of poetry. You can think of poems like Lake of Innisfree, The Stolen Child. Yeats is found in the strange company also of the pre-Raphaelites, and perhaps his poetry is not devoid of that sensuousness and vagueness of imagery, as we saw in the instance of Lake of Innisfree and Stolen Child. More than anything else, he must have shared the pre-Raphaelite rejection of this ugly world of reality and attempted to establish, to quote Yeats' own phrase, the land of the heart's desire. Till the end of his life, he was searching for the land of the heart's desire, the fairy land, escaping from the struggle of living. You can almost dismiss him, but he was a phoenix who could resurrect himself. Pre-Raphaelite influence was not the only influence in forming his idealism and visionary dreams. There was his deep, absorbing interest in the ancient culture of Ireland, the Celtic culture, with its rich mythology, Gaelic figures, glorious folklore. Yeats he very much wanted to resurrect the vanished glory of Ireland and continue to draw till the end metaphors and images for his poetry from this rich past. I just came across a letter of Sri Aurobindo dated 1st September 1932 in Letters on Yoga, okay, third volume. Letters on Yoga, third volume. A devotee is citing a passage from Yeats. And by the time Sri Aurobindo had become a recluse, he was not a political person, he had become a yogi. But Aurobindo was closely observing the kind of poetry that was being written in contemporary times. So somebody drew his attention to Yeats' poetry, and he replies that this is not at all surprising because Yeats being a Celtic poet, see, there's a strange force suggestive mystic life. So I just came across it, and later also I'll mention Aurobindo's both positive and negative comments on Yeats if there is time. So Yeats drew images and figures from the Celtic past. I'll cite some. Dublain, the pronunciation may not be correct. Angus, Kathleen de Naulihon, Oisin, Deirdre, etc. Another kind of influence was the 19th century French symbolism with its total rejection of the world of fact and phenomena, reason and logic, its uncompromising emphasis on intuition and subjective reality. I have mentioned many kinds of influences on the young Yeats. It would be a grievous omission if we ignore Yeats's falling in love with Maud Gonne, that great revolutionary Irish woman, his contemporary, his modern Helen of Troy, his image of Ireland. She was an unfailing source of inspiration and shaped his poetry till the very end. One of his very last poems is Bronze Head. One of the early poems, you see, or even middle poems, Leda and the Swan, among school children. And final poem, one of the final last poems is a Bronze Head. It is on Maud Gonne becoming an artifice of eternity. So, she was a great influence on his poetry. We'll come to that. We have said that it started as a dreamer and a hopelessly romantic poet, etc. Let us closely see a couple of poems to find whether even in this dreaminess, there's a coexistence of awareness of other reality. For instance, he wishes for the clothes of heaven. It is so very romantic, Tread softly because you tread on my dreams, he says. Or another poem, Down by the Sally Garden. The first is a typical, but not the less beautiful romantic lyric. In the second, there is a stock romantic situation. Story of a love affair of the past. The lover already at the time of the love affair, he seems to have had an opportunity to learn the true nature of love. Kiss is the attitude of an inexperienced young man who expects nothing less than absolute happiness from love. A close study, however, reveals that we have an already a sign of the later age. For if on the one hand, there's impossible hope for the lover, on the other, there is the attitude of the girl who knows that love is a fashion of the world and should not be taken seriously. There is as much romanticism here as a mockery of romanticism. For Mark, the girl has no name. Her hand is white. This is like a cinema actresses appearing for soap, advertisements. Okay? The girl has no name. Her hand is white. Her feet snow white. Stock romantic epithets. Not to mention the conventional romantic situation. Quote, and on my shoulder, she leaned. That's how cinematic representations were there in the 50s, 60s, and so on. But I recall one poem, never give all your heart. Yeats advises you, never give all your heart. At the turn of the 20th century, there was a great changing sensibility. This was awaiting to sweep the entire literary world. Of course, Yeats was in the thick of the Celtic twilight, already by 1888-89, striving to create a new poetry that would be Gaelic, Irish in national sentiment and romantic in mood. But there was a counter experience which seemed to rebuff him and draw him down to realities. In Yeats's poetry, there is this kind of complex structure. It's almost a kind of a template. There is a movement and there is a counter movement. Yeats has one, he registers one movement and there's a counter movement. So by the years 1900 to 1910, Yeats, who attempted writing plays, came to be involved with the Abbey Theatre. We remember the Irish dramatic movement and writers like John Millington Synge. Yeats was consciously participating in the Irish national literary movement, spearheaded by Lady Gregory. Managing the theatre, the players, the audience, mellowed his idealism and toughened his fiber. As he himself says, I quote him, by 1900, everybody got down off the stills. Single line. By 1900, everybody got down off his stills. Remember, in circus, people stand on stills and perform. Here, stills, when you get down off the stills, you find the ground reality. You find the terra firma. You're forced to come down. He strove more and more for accuracy and definiteness and simplicity, almost anticipating the ideals of T. Hume in England, and Ezra Pound in America. It is worth noting that Yeats's awareness of the change in modern sensibility and its needs precedes the revolutionary ideals proclaimed by Hume and Pound. The Image's ideals are only an extreme form of this realization. For instance, Pound and Hume are reacting violently to decadent romantic aesthetics of the Victorians, the Pre-Raphaelites, and the Georgians. They denounce vagueness and sloppiness in expression. They call for a clear, dry, hard poetry. Note any sonnetism, please. A poetry which would approximate to the precision and objectivity of mathematics. I'm reminded of Walter Pater here. Walter Pater thought that poetry should approximate to the condition of music. But for Hume Pound, poetry should approximate to the condition of mathematics with its precision and objectivity. And how beautifully Yeats caught this awareness in a neat little poem can be seen now. I quote this poem, which is called A Quote, Q-O-A-T. I'm quoting Q-U-O-T-E, a poem called A Quote, C-O-A-T. As in the Tamil tradition, I'll read the poem twice. I think in all over India, when you read poetry, you read the poem more than once. A quote. I made my song a coat, covered with embroideries, out of old mythologies, from heel to throat. But the fools caught it, wore it in the world's eyes, as though they had wrought it. Song, let me take it, for there is more enterprise in walking naked. Let me quote the poem again, as I said. I made my song a coat, covered with embroideries, out of old mythologies, from heel to throat. But the fools caught it, wore it in the world's eyes, as though they had wrought it. Song, let them take it, for there is more enterprise in walking naked. You'll see this poem surely looks forward to the revolution in Yeats's sensibility and style in the 20s. It is an open rejection of ornamental style, excessive metaphors, and embellishment. I'm thinking of the quote. It's the Maharajas in colonial times in India wore. We have the pictures of these Maharajas. Highly embroidered kind of coat they'll wear from throat to the heel, you see. And they took pride in the kind of dress attire they had. So here the quote that he refers to contains, it is embroidered with old mythologies. That means like some of the Maharajas in colonial times, they were not in touch with the present. They were living in some kind of a past. Yeats has utter contempt now for the kind of style in which such poetry was written. He himself was writing the kind of poetry. He just rejects that and chooses another way of existing, I should say. That's why he says, there is more enterprise in walking naked. Walking naked is not only walking like an avaduta with no dress. When I was a child, there was an avaduta in my place, Chidambaram. He used to walk naked across the street. Nobody ever noticed him. He was just walking by himself, you see. So walking naked is touching the reality, the ground reality. So in this poem, however, the very idea of giving up metaphors and embellishment, excessive use of ornamental style, okay, like the ones in the movie songs, in our movie songs in the 50s, I don't know about the Malayalam movie songs, but Tamil movie songs, 50s, 60s, almost up to the 70s, you see, full of euphemism, dreamy kind of language, and a very inverted kind of syntax and so on. Now he rejects all of that. But this idea is conveyed by means of a metaphor, that of a coat, that is discarding a coat and walking naked. Then we respond to it. We seem to associate Romanticism and call it modern, a precise modern poem. We seem to associate Romanticism with emotionalism, sentimentalism, woolly expression, and imagine craftsmanship, economy, and objectivity and precision as classical virtues. Because this antithesis, classicism versus Romanticism, Eliot was obsessed with this antithesis. No wonder that Pound, who met Yeats at this period in 1911, he shared a cottage with him in Sussex. He paid him warm, glorious tributes when he wrote. I'm quoting Ezra Pound. Mr. Yeats had once for all stripped English poetry of its but damnable rhetoric. Mr. Yeats has once and for all stripped English poetry of its but damnable rhetoric. He goes on to say, he has made our poetic idiom a thing pliable, a speech without inversion. He has made our poetic idiom a thing pliable, a speech without inversion. So the syntax was made simple. I'm once again thinking of movie lyrics and political speeches. You cannot understand the political speeches. There was so much of inversion, like movie songs and so on. Now, Pound is happy that Yeats was exploring a speech which would be rid of this inversion, and it will be a poetic idiom which would be pliable. Therefore, I go to Pound's most famous definition of an image. An image is that which presents an intellectual and emotional complex in an instant of time. An image is that which presents an intellectual and emotional complex in an instant of time. There are opposites which are fused together. They are incarnated in an image. One is emotional feeling. You don't emotionally feel and then intellectually write. This is a problem, almost this problem people had with Donne's poetry, and Eliot also writes in his tradition and individual talent, how to reconcile the two. And that was, it found a panacea in Pound's definition of image. An image is that which presents an intellectual and emotional complex in an instant of time, the simultaneity in emotional intensity and intellectual precision. So this would make us think of such profound images such as Byzantium or the great rooted blossomer or the Lydian body in Yeats's poetry later. Let us get back to the stills analogy. Yeats was forced to get down off the stills for various reasons. He was forced to face reality squarely and learn to digest the unpalatable. That is why I said, of the quarrel with ourselves, we make poetry. Of the quarrel with others, we make rhetoric. So he had to digest the undigestible, the unpalatable. One such force was his rejection. One such force was his unparalleled, tremendous passion for Morgane and her rejection of his proposal. Poor man, he proposed to her several times. She rejected him. And not only that, he proposed to his daughter later. She also rejected. You man, it cannot be more ridiculous than that. Is he proposing to the mother and proposing to the daughter and so on. So she rejected them. This was no ordinary passion, nor her refusal to marry him an ordinary common occurrence. She was Helen of Troy for him. A woman Homer sung in another poem. In another poem, which is called, No Second Troy. I'll come to that. The way in which he just raises her mythologically, Morgane, it tells us something about how she was a source of inspiration for him, how her rejection almost decimated him. But out of this decimation, like a phoenix, he rose. So she was a great patriot. I'm talking about Morgane. I wrote a poem because at one point he asked, do you cherish, is your poetry born out of a woman you won or a woman you lost? He married finally at a very late age, you see. But do you make your poetry out of the woman you won or out of the woman you lost? Yeats's poetry was made out of the woman he lost rather than the woman that he, of course, partly true, or the woman that he married. I wouldn't say when. I wrote an article also on this particular Morgane poems of Yeats. I forget it, but if I get the exact title of the poem, I have not included it in my CV, but Professor Das, he published it in his, Professor Vijay Kumar Das from Cuttack, he published this article in his book on Yeats, and so day before yesterday, he was quite kind to just give me the detail of his book. So, Morgane, she was a great patriot, full of idealism, sometimes crazy, of course. So, she envisaged the future Ireland, rich in its life, which she thought she could establish with the help of Yeats and some other patriots. She was a person of enormous energy and drive, sometimes misdirected. Yeats has been critical of her in poems like Prayer for My Daughter. I may not have time to talk about that. So she was sometimes misdirected and thought the living for the country no mean matter for compromise in the form of marriage. Though Yeats could not share all her enthusiasm, he too was sufficiently devoted to his country, and he jumped into the freedom movement despite his Protestant background. There was, however, this double disappointment in Yeats's life. One is the rejection of Morgan, but that was not the only thing. She did not stop with rejecting him. She subsequently married McBride, a man called McBride. So his volume Reconciliation talks about some of these disappointments. So one is his personal disappointment. The other is the thorough disillusionment with contemporary Ireland, with its mean, I'm quoting, petty shopkeeping, purse-proud middle class, with its horrible violence and mediocrity. It's dirty politics. Okay? So later he asks to see, this Ireland does not deserve this Helen of Troy, Morgan. There is no second Troy to burn, he says. So this is the period of what could be called disintegration. The first could be considered a period of integration. The second could be called period of disintegration, of disillusionment and honest groping for values. A poem like 1919 expresses his scorn for Paudine, the shopkeeper. Paudine, the shopkeeper, who fumbles in a greasy till, prudently reckoning the profit and loss. Like many of the middle class people in India, I see, even at the time of tsunami, even at the time of the great flood of 2015, I was worried, will I get my milk? Is there something in my pantry? Can I survive? And so on. So Paudine is here, the shopkeeper, the Irish shopkeeper, who fumbles in the greasy till, prudently reckoning the profit and loss. And most importantly, it says, remote from saint, hero, or poet. The tripartite ideals for him. Saint, who is removed from saint, who is removed. Saint, who is. Can I continue? Can I continue, madam?
Yeah, sure, ma'am. Sure. Sorry
Yes.
for the disturbance.
So the tripartite of saint, hero, and poet. The middle class Irishmen in his time, they were far removed from the saint who has renounced life, the hero who strove hard to achieve something, and the poet who tried to achieve self-vision and self-knowledge. So a complex expression, consummate expression of Yeats's attitude to problems in life in this period is, of course, his superb poem, Easter 1916. A glance at September 1913 may also be revealing. I was fortunate to read all these poems with my great teacher, Professor Sethuraman, when I did my PhD with him. My subject was not Yeats, but I lived with him nearly almost with him and his wife and his old mother for nearly 4 years, though I was in the hostel. So I learned a lot during this period. It shaped my life and career. Till now, if at all I'm alive, it's because of the kind of association I had with Professor Sami and till the end of his life with Professor Sethuraman. So a glance at September 1913 may be revealing. There we see Yeats full of scorn for the petty politicians, the middle class, and no notion of the romantic Ireland, which is dead and gone. According to him, the romantic Ireland is dead and gone. And the great patriots like O'Leary who are dead. That is why he wrote the poem, No Second Troy. There is no second Troy for, they don't deserve somebody like Morgan. You cannot burn another Troy. In India also today, some people are saying Gandhi is not there. He must have lived to see what's happening. The people have no sense of, later he said, see, the West lack conviction and the West are full of passionate intensity in Second Coming. I'll come to that. So, for them, life constitutes the middle class people praying and adding halfpence and pence. But Easter 1916 is a profounder, fuller poem than September 1913. Apparently, it deals with the political rising in the British occupation of Ireland at the time of Easter in 1916 in Dublin, where some people were shot dead. The poem celebrates martyrdom, the birth of what he calls a terrible beauty and heroism from the sacrifices made by the bourgeois. See, the middle class people coming with their, I quote, their vivid faces from the counter or desk among grey 18th century houses. So, at one point he says in the poem, too long a sacrifice can make a stone of the heart. There is an ambivalence in the attitude to this event of a few people dying in the shootout during the season of Easter. Okay. This is born of the awareness of the complex nature of the truth of martyrdom. This poem is about martyrdom. Let me say, as a student of English literature, that the martyrs here were no Thomas Becket. You remember Thomas Becket? Eliot wrote his famous play, Murder in the Cathedral. And I'm going back to the chronicles relating to the relationship between Henry II and Thomas Becket, how he was once very close to Henry II. But later, he chose to become a martyr. So, the people in Eastern 1916 who are celebrated, who created a terrible beauty by their heroism, were no Thomas Becket. So, let me just look at the way in which it structures this poem. There is the season of Easter. This is a season of resurrection. We have martyrs in this season because Christ was resurrected, but the martyrs here were very ordinary men. And they came from uncompromising places and reached that martyrdom. They were unheroic men, but they were transformed into great heroic people. And a great beauty is born, but this beauty is called a terrible beauty by the poet. Why? Because of the cost at which they have become immortal. So the poet contemplates that one frozen moment of martyrdom, which in his opinion, it's a waste and decay of human earthly promise. What was living has now become dead. So immortality is born of the moment when they were petrified. Petrification is a Latin word, but he uses a very simple word. He says, sacrifice has reduced them to a stone that is there in the midst of a living stream. It is obstructing the living stream, like Madras. Okay, so they have reached the condition, he also says, of tragic stasis as opposed to dynamism. So they are cold, marble-like. So their immortality has all these qualities, as opposed to the living flux and the rhythm, which is represented by various images like horse, the living stream, the birds, the horse crashing along, and the long-legged moor, and the hens on the trees, and the hens calling to more hens, and so on. We'll come to the same subject as in Sailing to Byzantium. So this poem is a superb political poem for its perfect control and tone and profundity of perception. It is neither praise nor blame. Some people may not like Yeats because he was sort of conservative, but this poem is great as a poem. It is dialectical in its awareness of truth of the situation, which a panegyric could not have accomplished. This poem is not a panegyric. Panegyric is a poem where you have one-sided praise. In all my career, I remember teaching two great political poems. One is this great poem, it's Easter 1916, almost till the end of my life, I should say. I mean, I enjoyed teaching Yeats. The other is the great poem by Andrew Marvell. He wrote many kinds of poems, but this one is a very, very different kind of poem. Andrew Marvell's Horatian Ode upon Cromwell's return from Ireland to England. Many of you might have read it. I enjoyed reading the poem and enjoyed teaching it again and again. Horatian Ode upon Cromwell's return from Ireland to England. Once again, there is Ireland. Cromwell went there, crushed the Irish people, and came back to Ireland. Okay, and the crown was offered to him thrice. He rejected it thrice and chose to be a protectorate and somebody who wanted to serve the people. Of course, later, you see, you know very well that Charles I was killed and so on, assassinated and so on. So, put to death. So, these two poems, they tell you what it is to structure a political poem in a dialectical manner, looking for the awareness, the doubleness of every experience, and none of them is a panegyric. One could, at this point of time, pause to see how preoccupations central to Yeats have emerged very clearly. By this time in his poetry, this preoccupation became antinomies of life. What were the antinomies? Youth and age, ignorance and wisdom, body and self on one hand, soul on the other. The concrete and the abstract, the subjective and the objective, time and eternity. Yeats was preoccupied with time and eternity, life and art, the last two particularly, and the first, youth and age. He wrote many prose works, and I also happened to read some of them with my professor. Man can embody truth, but he cannot know truth. The advisors may not like it, but Yeats wrote, man can embody truth, but he cannot know truth. So I'm thinking of volumes like Michael Robote's 1921, Winding Stair and Little Tower, and so on, where the titles of some of the poems tell you how there was this dialectical awareness. I'm thinking of poems like Dialogue of the Soul and the Self, The Daemon and the Beast. The demon here is not demon, it is the daemon of the self, Blood and the Moon, and so on. Yeats was exploring the problem. What is the problem? How to escape the ravage of time and attain to the ideal condition of living. Where will you find that? An answer is sought in the twin Byzantium poems. You know very well, Byzantium is a historically very important place. And very recently, you see, the Turkish Prime Minister decided to make the Byzantium Cathedral, Santa Sofia, into a mosque. And Byzantium had a checkered history. It was destroyed, rebuilt, and then it was famous for its great painting, mosaic work, and so on. And it has the most majestic cathedral, and its architecture influence almost, it went up to Russia. And there were a couple of articles on Byzantium in Yeats and, in Hindu, but none of them ever understood, you see, how it can become a space for contemplation. So I wrote to them saying, Hindu wrote to them saying that I want to write on how Yeats approached Byzantium. As my luck would have it, you see, there was no response from the Hindu, because I'm not an important person. So only if you're an important person, you see, you get replies. So an answer is sought in the twin poems, Byzantium. Byzantium for Yeats, if you look up, you see, it's a shore city. So it is there between Aegean Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. And for earlier, in the early years, it was a Greek, part of a Greek culture. And so its artisans and artists were all Greek. And Yeats was deeply interested in the symbolic significance of Byzantium. It became a metaphor, and perhaps more image than a metaphor, I should say, using his own language, more symbol than an image. So it became highly suggestive for Yeats. It was Constantinople at the time of the Islamic invasion. Now it's called Istanbul, and so on. And trade-wise, it is very, very important. It's a place which mattered quite a lot in history. So from his prose writings and letters, we learn that Yeats looks upon Byzantium as a perfect emblem of perfect, pure living. I was thinking, like Vaikuntha for Vaishnavites, or Krishna's Mathura for devotees, and so on. So Yeats regarded this as a perfect emblem of perfect, pure living, a condition of simplicity, as opposed to what he calls the complexity. I've been coming to this phrase, it has just obsessed me all my life with it, the complexity of this life. Byzantium is a holy city for him. It's a capital of Eastern Christianity. So this second poem is situated at the time of Emperor Justinian, who was a model emperor, and how Byzantium flourished in his time. So for Yeats, it is a holy city. It's a capital of Eastern Christianity. All of you know that the Roman Empire moved itself to the east and made Byzantium its eastern capital. So here we see how Yeats attaches several symbolic significances to this city. It's a holy city, as I said, it's the capital of Eastern Christianity. It is also the heaven of man's imagination. It's a very important idea. In his earliest dream, he was looking for the land of the heart's desire. This search for the land of the heart's desire is not discarded by the latter Yeats, but it has mellowed into a profound search for a visionary city. As I told you, Vaishnavites believe in Vaikuntha, and Krishna Bhaktas believe in Krishna's Mathura and Vrindavan, and so on. And so, this is a world of perfect art. We come to the next point, world of artifice of eternity. So, it is a heaven of man's imagination, and it is an estate's paradise. So, all this is compounded in that one city, Byzantium, which becomes a space. I'm thinking of the great architectural monuments in Tamil Nadu, like the Tanjavur temple or the Mahabalipuram cave temples, or if you go to Karnataka, the Hampi complex, or I went to Konark with my mother, I tried to just go up and down. You wonder how they made it, no? It is an estate's paradise. It is an artifice of eternity. If you now go to Mathura, Agra, and Varanasi, you look at the dirt and say, the Mathura, where Krishna rolled, and people now go there, the Bhaktas go and roll in the mud because Krishna was there. I'm not denigrating it, but I'm saying that in the imagination, a place becomes associated, it becomes a kind of multiple metaphor. And so the last idea is the artifice of eternity. It's an essay, it's paradise. No wonder that Yeats thinks of sailing to this place. Sailing is an important metaphor once again, because journey, as you know, is an archetypal metaphor. In poetry, in anthropology, in our epics and itihasas and so on, to sail is a kind of journey. I would say here is sailing, but it's a journey to this place. So in one way, it's a kind of a physical journey. He's moving away from Ireland towards Byzantium, but it is also a spiritual journey in the second poem. So the poem juxtaposes two neat sets of images. On the one hand, you have Ireland. Somebody asked me, Madam, why should Ireland be condemned? No, he's not condemning. Ireland becomes just a place which is a condition of human life. Therefore, it begins. That country is not for old men. When the poem Sailing to Byzantium begins, that country is not for old men. He's looking back and looking at the place that he's leaving. And it's not only a place, it's also a space, it's a metaphor. And then, why does he reject it? We ask a question. He finds the following images. The young are in one another's arms. And what is he? He's an aged man, like a tattered coat. Okay? So, he cannot love anymore. His body has lost all its energy. He's falling ill. But there in in Ireland, the young are in one another's arm, and there are birds in the trees, and their songs are there. But he has a oxymoronic phrase, the dying generation. He calls it a dying generation. Generation is bringing to life. Dying is the opposite of it. So he heaps contempt on that. There are other images which describe the live orientation. One is salmon falls. The salmon is a fish which falls like a waterfall. And then mackerel, which is the typical Irish, it crowds the Irish sea. And then comes a phrase, fish, flesh, fowl. There's not only alliteration, it's an epigrammatic compacting of the entire living world. Fish, flesh, fowl. And then he says begetting and death. And you have the sensual music. So there's a plethora of pleasurable experiences. But all that is reduced, all the joys of life is reduced to a ridiculous, contemptible condition. That is, according to this aged man, who cannot enjoy any of this. Therefore, he decides he does not want to be in that condition. He does not want to be in the order of nature to which all these images belong, all these creatures belong. Therefore, he sails towards Byzantium. As I said, Byzantium is a holy city. He'll come to, in sailing to Byzantium, how he describes this Byzantium. The most important phrase is monument of unaging intellect. Byzantium, the artifice of eternity, they're all produced by monuments of unaging intellect. What are the monuments there? You have the holy fire in which stand the sages. They are singing. Sages are supposed to be, people who have renounced everything. As opposed to sensual music, they are singing. Okay, standing in the holy fire, they are purified. Whereas, I'm thinking of the other kind of music, which is sensual music. And in Byzantium, you have the artifice of eternity represented by the hammered gold and gold enameling made by the Grecian goldsmiths. This is from history, actually. So they were capable of just beating the gold and making birds out of this gold, the birds which are artifice of eternity, but which could sing. So here is a man who is sick, his heart is sick with desire, and he says, fasten to a dying animal. He is not dead, but he is a dying animal, but his heart is sick with desire. See, this is what contemporary theory tells you, how we are driven by our desire self. So we simply cannot ignore our desire self, whether it is feminism or contemporary theory of any other kind. We are driven by our raga and dvesha, as the Indian thought would say. So the poem makes an apparently determined choice. And what is the choice? To reject Ireland, metaphorically speaking, and whatever that is embodied in Ireland, the condition of living, and pray to be gathered. He uses the verb. He would like to be gathered into the artifice of eternity in Byzantium. And here, the poet's heart seems to be very much in the here and the now. There's a great paradox here. Even though he rejects the island condition, his heart is very much in the here and the now. Because that miraculous form in the emperor's garden, which has been made by Greek artists, you see, they could only sing of what is past, passing, or to come. What is past, passing, and to come is time. And therefore, they may belong to the order of eternity, but the bird is singing of time. And therefore, I would say there is a kind of nostalgia for the things which this aged man and aging man cannot have. What is that? Youth, its delight, its music, its love, and so on. So his friend Serge Moore, if I remember right, found this poem to be faulty. Serge Moore said, what's all this? After all the search, you find a bird and that bird only sings of time and not of eternity. So Yeats thought about it. And immediately he did not write a counter poem. It took a little time and wrote the second poem, Byzantium. I would call it a spiritual travelogue, and my teacher so wonderfully explained how it can be made really live to younger generation. Some of them may think it's a ridiculous poem, but it made tremendous sense to me when I was young. So it's a spiritual travelogue, a place of emancipation. So when we move to the second poem, there is, you see, the same dialogue of the self and the soul, which was there earlier, and it is played out in a different way. The problem is much more pursued much more dialectically. We have here, I would say, he enters there in the midnight. Midnight is an order, okay, where one order, midnight is a time, an hour, when one order is replaced by another order. And there's a kind of an ethereal darkness or a kind of light which could be starlit or moonlit, and the unpurged day is receding. Okay, even the drunken soldiery are dead. Night resonance recedes, and the prostitutes are all gone. What is left? The great cathedral gone. So there are two things there: the dome and the gong. The dome is a perfect architectural structure, as I told you. See, the great architects of Byzantium took it almost up to Russia. It's very difficult to make a dome, a perfect dome. So this dome disdains all that man is. There's alliteration there. Dome disdains all that man is. Very simple sentence, but very difficult. All that man is, it is disdain. What is man? All mere complexities, the fury and the mire of human brain. So complexities as opposed to simplicity. This was something that Yeats was constantly trying to explore, the fury and the mire of human veins. So the fury, as I told you, we are driven by our desire self, and the mire of human veins. He does not say human personality, human vein, because in the vein you have the blood, and blood is the seat of our emotion and our passion. And this dome and the gong, they call you to a different order. He enters in the middle of the night, and he is intimidated almost. You see, he's in great trepidation, and he has, you must imagine, he's become almost, he's newly dead, shall we say? Newly dead. How else can I describe it? Okay. And he enters, and the gong, and he needs a spiritual guide, because it's a tourism, spiritual tourism. You need a guide. And the guide is in the form of a shade, already dead. Okay. And the shade is described as shade more than man, more image than a shade. And it comes a great idiom, a homely idiom. Hades bobbin. There is no allegory there. Hades bobbin, bound in mummy cloth, may unwind the winding path. What is this shade? It is newly dead. To use an Indian thought, it has unwound all its karmas. Okay, that is why Hades bobbin, a homely image is there. Bobbin winds and unwinds. And in mummy cloth, showing that it is dead, may unwind the winding path. So our spiritual leaders tell us, please do not just increase your karmas, unwind your karmas in this world.
Indra, ma'am. Ma'am, you're muted.
Okay?
Yes, okay, ma'am. Okay.
Yes. So the problem is pursued here with its gong and the dome and the shade And the bird, he comes now as he moves further, see, into the emperor's garden. And in the garden, he finds, once again, the structure, miracle, bird or handiwork, more miracle than a bird or handiwork. What is that? First, he doesn't tell you what is that miracle. It is a bird. And it is conning aloud common bird and petal. And it is conning aloud complexities of mire and blood. I've already told you, this world is thought of as living in carnality, the corporeal world, with all its complexities, is described as a mire and blood and begetting and so on. So here, it just cons aloud the common bird and petal and the glory of changeless metal. He's just stunned. And then he moves further and to the dancing floor. You know, as I told you, the Byzantium mosaic was very, very famous. And they made dancing floor. And I just asked my sister's son-in-law when he went there to Istanbul to give a lecture. I just said, please go and see the Santa Sofia. They call it Hagia Sophia, and see all those architectural marvel because it has been so much part of my consciousness and so on. So he came back and told me what he saw there and so on. So there is a dancing floor. And on this dancing floor, there is something which is a miraculous thing which is happening. You turn around, you see, on the dancing floor, the mosaics are being broken by the great mosaic artists. And when they just fill it up again, once again, you see the mosaics glow into a fire. And therefore, Yeats talks about a fire there, a purifying fire, which cannot singe a sleeve, he says. It can do you no harm, but it purifies. It's a purgatorial fire. And in the fire, come and fall who? The spirits, the newly dead and dying spirits. They come in great hordes. See, they're called blood-begotten spirits. You turn around and see from where do they come? And that's where we go to the last stanza. At midnight, last but one stanza, the emperor's pavement, flames that no faggot feeds, now steel has lit, that is self-begotten flame begotten of flame, where blood-begotten spirits come, and all complexities of furies leave, dying into a dance, an agony of dance, an agony of flame that cannot singe a sleeve. I read the stanza. I have explained to you. You have the fire, and you have the dancing floor, and you have the spirits coming there and dying into a dance, an agony of trance. They go into a different state altogether, an agony of flame that cannot singe a sleeve. Then you turn round, the last stanza almost startles you. A straddle on the dolphin's mire and blood, spirit after spirit. The smithies break the flood, the golden smithies of the emperor. Marbles on the dancing floor break with the furies of complexity. And finally, the last line, the dolphin torn, that gong tormented sea. So what's the last stanza? You have the Byzantine dancing floor and the spirits who are being remade, but they're coming. Where do they come from? They come from life. You turn there and you have the archetypal image, as Nathra Fry would put it, you see. The image of the sea, samsara sagaram, as we say. The sea could be quiet, but it is not a gong tormented sea. It is turbulent. It is thrown into great turbulence because the gong is tolling and calling you from one kind of order to another kind. And blood begotten spirits, they're begotten still from blood, and they're just coming there. And not only that, you just forget that. The marble floor, you turn round and see the sea. You have the dolphins, not one or two, but many. You know very well, dolphin both in real life and in mythology is a warm-blooded creature. And therefore it is associated with human beings and it's very friendly to man. And you can even today, in shows, you see, in America and other places, even in India, people can ride on a dolphin. And these dolphins are carrying, they're mounted on the dolphin come, spirit after spirit, not one or two, many. From where? The sea. Sea is thrown into great turbulence. So they come there to give up their fury and their mire. So the rajas and tamas which propel man to action, it is finally, you see, what is our life? It is mire. It's a mire of human being. That is like Ambalapura Paisam. Because I'm speaking to Thrissur people, I'm saying Ambalapura Paisam is very different from the kind of watery Paisam that people make here in Tamil Nadu. It is very thick. You can't consume that Paisam. It's so very, I'm not saying poison. I'm talking about Paisam. I suppose you hear that very well. And so you just come here The sea in the last stanza is a fit symbol of life, and all these creatures come there. So this is like a poem which affirms the supremacy of art, its enjoyment. It also implies that life provides material for art. There cannot be art without life. Without a sea, there cannot be a Byzantium. Okay, and the force of life is so invincible. So this is like a cricket match, my favorite subject. Those of you who've heard me, you may forgive me for repeating it. This is like playing a cricket match, you see, especially T20. 19 overs, where you come to the 19th over, almost your team is to be lost. But there are very few balls left, maybe 3 or 4. A pinch hitter or a Dhoni comes. And then 3/4 of the Byzantium poem is about the artifice of eternity. And then comes the last line and last image. The sea comes, a Dhoni comes and hits a 6 and takes you, as you say in cricket journalism, across the line to victory. Okay, you never expect this. It happens, and it has happened several times, even in ODI, as in happens in 2011. And therefore, you are just, you're not very sure whether Yeats' heart is with Byzantium or whether its heart is with the sea. That's why it's I said every time he resurrects himself by writing this kind of poetry, whether life is given the last word or artifice of eternity, monument of unaging intellect is given the last word, or whether it is eternity which is celebrated or whether invincible time is celebrated. It's very clear that Yeats was searching for the kind of image which would resolve all contraries and defy dichotomies. I just wanted to say something here. In Mahabharata, a scene was enacted by the great dancer Padma Subramaniam. This is the disrobing of Draupadi. In the beginning, Duryodhana is absolutely triumphant. Okay, yard after yard, he's just pulling. Okay, he thinks that she's going to be disrobed. But by Krishna's help, I mean, I'm not going into feminism in this. I'm only using it as an analogy. That is, when you come to the end of Byzantium, you're wondering, the world of art is like Duryodhana. That is, this great artist, Bharatanatyam artist, present at Duryodhana, actually falling, exhausted, completely tired over the heap of clothes that is pulled out of Draupadi's body. So, in this poem, Byzantium may be like Duryodhana. I'm not very sure. When you just look at this, this problem is very well discussed with us by two great teachers. That's why I'm not very sure what to say in this. It's very clear that Yeats was looking for an image which would resolve all contraries, defy dichotomies. However majestic Byzantium and its art may be, there still seems to be some incompleteness as far as it is not a living beauty, but only a monument of unaging intellect. What a great phrase, monument of unaging intellect. I'm thinking of the poem Keats's Grecian Urn, which I read in 1963 as a BA student. In the Grecian Urn, the poet adores the marble vases and how the young people, you see, they are just immortalized there. But he also seems to realize that they can never enjoy the happiness which is here available in the perishable life. You are fair forever, but thou can never kiss her, he tells the lover. And therefore, you have this great problem which poetry alone can explore. Spirituality tells you, give up this life, but you cannot easily give up this life. Thus, the search for a deeper reconciliation of the opposites is made in the beautiful poem Among School Children. I am taking this poem after Byzantium, though it is written before Byzantium. And this is one of my favorite poems. Among School Children is almost a very homely kind of thing. At the end of this, I must say that this is a poem where by the time Yeats had become politically very important and he became a politician and he became a school inspector. He visits it is a very drab beginning. He visits a school as an inspector and the children are all neat and just neatly attired. They're just waiting there in great order, and the nun there impresses the inspector, telling them that they can just sew, they can count on their fingers, they are neat and so on. This is how I did when I was in school also. When the inspectors came, how to impress the inspectors. And he just looks at these young children, they are beautiful. Okay. And he thinks of Morgan, who was once a child like that. But then immediately his philosophical turn of mind takes him to time and the passage of time. And what will happen to these people, the great Lydian body? How does philosophy look at it? So he moves into great philosophical cogitation in this poem by going back to the three great Greek philosophers, I should say. One is Plato, two levels. How you are born, I mean, there's a great Maya or a veil, I would say, which is hiding the reality. And the other aspect of Plato is how you are born as two halves, and in love you can become one. This is one philosophical view. The other is Aristotle, who is called the solider Aristotle, because he is more pragmatic than Plato. So here he was also tutor to Alexander, and therefore, you see, he could take liberties. Then the third one is the Neoplatonist, is Pythagoras, who discovered the number theory and the music of spheres, which Yeats refers to in Grecian urn. See, ditties of no tone, says Yeats in Grecian urn. This is 1965. I read it in 1965. I may be wrong. Okay, so here you just see how the poem brings in a philosophical attitude by which, Yeats is able to contemplate the passage of time, and all these people have become really old stick. What happened to their great intellect? It has finally been reduced to this. And therefore, he is just thinking of or exploring an image or a pair of images which could display what I would call the unity of being. What are they? A pair of images which are more than a reconciliation of opposites. They in fact constitute a perfect fusion. They are the images of the chestnut tree and the dancer. I'll read out this last stanza. Labor is blossoming or dancing, where the body is not bruised to pleasure soul, nor beauty born of its own despair, nor blear-eyed wisdom out of midnight's oil. Look at it. Labor is blossoming or dancing. That is, every labor should produce. A mother has a labor pain, produces a child. A farmer produces corn. A dancer labors to produce dance. Okay, but here it is blossoming, something so enjoyable. Okay, the body is not bruised to pleasure soul. You don't burn midnight oil to become a scholar. And the second image, oh chestnut tree, the great rooted blossomer, are you the leaf, the bloom, the bowl? So this is something wonderful. The great chestnut tree, like the Ashwatha tree, which Krishna talks about in the Bhagavad Gita, which is an inverted tree, the chestnut tree, the rooted blossomer. Are you the leaf, the bowl, or the blossom? Malame, the great 19th century symbolist, said, a dancer. We'll come to the third one. Sorry, I just let me come to the third one. The second image is that of a dancer. A body swayed to music. Oh, brightening glance. Can you know the dancer from the dance? Oh, body swayed to music. Oh, brightening glance. How can you know the dancer from the dance? The moment you begin to see the dancer as a body, you cease to experience dance. And so the kind of oneness, the dancer is just the same as the dance, whatever is the physical body. Malame, let me quote him. So this poem has a rhapsodic resolution. And Malame says a dancer is not just a woman, but the elemental aspect or fusion of the human form. So she produces the dance. Let me give an example. When I was young, my mother mentioned one of the greatest of Bharatanatyam dances that this country has ever produced, Bala Saraswati. She was recently reading a lot. Kriya has published a Tamil translation of her grandson's biography on Bala Saraswati. She came from a prostitute class. I'm not going to go into that. And a repository of great rich tradition. She was very tall. She did not have a dancer's body. And she was also thick-made. And over the years, she became very thick. So people were also scoffing at her. But the dance that she produced, you see, my mother said, when she sang and read, danced, Krishna ni begane baro, the Kannada lyric, Krishna, the Yasoda is singing, Yasoda, the mother, the foster mother is singing, Krishna ni begane baro, please come fast. If there were Krishna, Krishna would come. Dance producer. You cease to look at Bala Saraswati, the dancer. You became the dance. Now there is Hema Malini. She is 73 years old. She dances with her daughter. I'm not denigrating her. She has a body which is that of a dancer. Bala Saraswati may not have had a body which could be traditionally considered as a dancer's body. Hema Malini also dances with great spiritual effect. When she danced before Meera, whom I had seen, her guru, Aurobido's disciple, and when she dances about Radha and Krishna and so on. So the poet is evoking here a way of life in which the self is not divided. That is why the brightening glance, body swayed to music. How can you know the dancer from the dance? So it is not bruised pleasure soul where labor is blossoming. Even the chestnut tree is made up of the root, the blossom and the bowl. So are the dancer and the dance inseparable and indivisible. Such should be the beauty of the unity of being. Advaitins may not accept it, but in Visishaadvaita, there is some kind of an understanding of this. What is the meaning of this created world? How to just connect the created world to the creator, the perfect concert of being and becoming. In his last poems, Yeats is, because I've called him a phoenix, is much troubled by the limitations of existence. I'm very fond of the last poems. I have read with great avidity, lapis lazuli, statues, vacillation, brass head, but I'll only take up lapis lazuli here before I come to second coming, which is not a last poem. Lapis lazuli is created by nature. It is something like a kind of a marble, but it can be carved into an artistic image. And Yeats sees that lapis lazuli carved, and there are many carvings on this lapis lazuli. Yeats ascends this lapis lazuli along with the Chinamen there, who are philosophers, aging old men, going up to the mountain, and the landscape changes, and there are trees, and above the trees, then there is snow, and so on. So you see the vicissitudes of life along with the Chinese philosopher. And once you go up there, you see from the eminence, as Middleton Murray said of Keats in Grecian Urn, there is the great eminence from which you look at life. Okay? And there's a transvaluation of life, as Murray said it. So he looks at it in two ways. One is to look at the civilization. He sees various civilizations coming and going, horseback, camelback, assback. There is almost, I should say, there is nothing very grandiose about the imagery. Okay, it's very homely imagery. The other one is the metaphor of theatre. He goes along with the Chinese people and sees the performance of King Lear and Hamlet. And then he says a very important thing there. King Lear and Hamlet are gay. See, they're dying. They're about what is their attitude to death. When you perform as an artist, you have to die, but you don't die. You are still somebody. You are able to see it, view it objectively from an eminence. So, King Lear and Hamlet are gay. Gaiety is an important word in Yeats. It is that transfigures everything, he says. Gaiety transfigures everything. So, Lapis Lazuli is a poem, one of the last poems, where Yeats is still exploring and finding new images. He never say die kind of spirit with that, no. He finds new images to describe how to look at life. The bronze head is about Maud Gonne, as I told you. She becomes an artifact, and it is there in a Metropolitan Museum. She has lost all her Lydian beauty. Only the eyes are there just looking at everything. She's a tomb hunter and so on. Now, I'm going back, a word on one important problem in reading Yeats's poetry. It may not be out of place here. Yeats as a poet found existing religion inadequate and science as hostile to imaginative living. This was between the wars, you remember. So he thought of creating his own system of belief. It explores, among many things. He wrote a book called A Vision. In this, you see, he gives an explanation of his own system. It explores, among things, some of you might be interested, 3 issues. One is, I'm interested, the meaning and development of history. How do we view history? It's a very highly contentious term now. The second one, psychology of the human being. Psychologists are interested, spiritualists are interested, gurus are interested. The human being, what makes a human being? What are the aspects to a human being? And then finally, life of soul after death, eschatological. So, Byzantium is a poem which looks at life of soul after death. These 3 things are at length explored in Vision. So, Yeats drew a number of potential metaphors from Vision of his wife, who they are charged with special ancient meaning. The question is whether we should know the system in order to understand the poems. Should we just grant his belief in order to accept the poems? Many times the answer may be no. However, the poem can be read without the help of the system, but there is no denying that it throws light on the meaning of many passages. I will give an example by taking the second coming. I'll read the poem out. The second coming. turning and turning and widening gyre. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loose upon the world. The blood dipped tide is loose. And everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all regulation, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Very true even today. Almost a magnificent beginning. Okay, a magnetic effect, turning and widening gyre. Gyre is an important image throughout in Yeats' poetry. It's a kind of a straight line. You made it, whirl it, it becomes a gyre. Okay, like a cycle tire which is sat on that gyre. And the falconer cannot hear the falconer. Who is this falcon? The falcon could be God, it could be religion, it could be Christianity, it could be your own Atma. And the falconer is man. And therefore, things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Achabe's famous play is, novel is made after this phrase. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. So, there is anarchy. Mere anarchy is loose upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loose, he says. So, blood is something of an obsession with Yeats. Okay? And dimmed tide, because now later he'll say he cannot see clearly. And everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. In the poem Pray for My Daughter, he talks about it. The cornucopia of life. You should not reject it. You should not become a mark-on, he says. So, ceremony of innocence. So, in life there is ceremony. But in today's life, there is no ceremony. Okay? It's drowned. And this is a pity. We talk about it in modern times about Indians. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. So, I should say this time is now, the century is now ripe for an apocalyptic happening. So, you expect a second coming to happen, the second coming of Christ. How does Christ come? Or how does a second coming, second annunciation happen? The second stanza, which is startling. Surely, some revelation is at hand. Surely, the second coming is at hand. The second coming. Hardly these words are out when a vast image out of Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in the sands of the desert, a shape with lion body and a head of man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, moving its slow thighs, while all about it reel shadows of indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again. But now I see that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come, round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be reborn. There are a number of images. One is Bethlehem. For second annunciation, you require a Bethlehem. But it is associated with maternal tenderness and Mary. But what goes to be reborn there is not Christ as we know. A fluting, piping Krishna or a gentle Christ. It's not going there to be reborn. But it's a slouching beast. You can't imagine Krishna slouching with a slouching thighs. So the rocking cradle is going to rock a nightmare, he says. And so the second coming, where does it come from? It's an archetypal image. It comes from Spiritus Mundi, the great memory. Okay? And it troubles my sight. You don't feel happy about it. It troubles my sight. It's not, you are not the three magi who are happy singing the carol, okay, in search of Christ. But here it troubles my sight because blood dimmed the tide. Then the shape that creature is described. It's a shape which is with a lion's body and a head of man, like Narasimha in Indian mythology. It has a lion's body and a head of man. And it has a gaze. It doesn't see anybody in particular, which is blank. And it is called pitiless as the sun, because the sun, for instance, its heat is just there. It doesn't feel very bad for a child which is dying out of heat in Bihar, or Rajasthani woman who carries a huge vessel on her head, walks long distances, miles to get a pot of water. It is pitiless in that sense. Okay? And then it is gaze. It doesn't look at anybody. Gaze doesn't mean that he is looking at anybody. It is moving its slouching thighs. It's a slow thighs. And its action is described as slouching towards Bethlehem. So, you are just wondering, what is this beast? What kind of dispensation he was expecting? This is written after the First World War. Hitler was very much there somewhere at a distance, and the Polish Jews were dying, the concentration camp, and the Christian civilization was just almost, the people who were pious, who believed, they did not know what to do. Okay, piety did not really make heaven come there. People did not see reason. They were violent and so on. So they were receding. The pious people were receding. Okay, one thing is mentioned how the Pope, never objected when in Italy, the fascists killed the children. Okay, Pope kept quiet because he couldn't say anything and so on. So the best lack conviction, while the worst are passionate, full of passionate intensity. This poem has an hypnotic effect. It is apocalyptic in nature, but it does not usher in a kind of confidence that you normally expect with the first association, annunciation. The new order is going to be something. Is it better? No. We are facing the worst kind of possibility of the present, people say. The second part is full of images of fear, clumsiness, portentousness, horrible helplessness, leaving us wondering what kind of life would be ushered in by this beast slouching towards Bethlehem. How will Mary receive him? Will there be a Mary? Will it be Christ? So Yeats was turning towards some other kind of a solace or some other kind of reading. He read a lot of theosophy. He read Advaitic philosophy. He listened to gurus. He wrote on Mohini Chatterjee, his teacher, Rohit Swami, from whom he learned a lot, and so on. So he could not die to a living body and become a soul. Thank you very much. I hope I've taken enough.
Okay, so Sony sir, would you like to say anything more to Dr. Indra?
Yes, a few things. I hope I'm not being disruptive to your protocol. To start with, I just realized that the subject of W.B. Yeats, since I was surrounded with W.B. Yeats about 35 to 40 years ago, since then, till this day, it continues to be elusive and intimidating for me as an outsider. But I intend to listen to your lecture again, so there'll be another opportunity for me to pick up some bits and pieces. But again, I'm not a student of literature. Literature is an outside subject for me. But thank you very much. I wanted to represent my family. I meant to do this last year, but for some reason I could not. I know my father was introduced here as a teacher, as an academic, and as a friend. So those things indeed he were. But at the same time, I wanted to take a step to the side and reintroduce him through some other facets of his personality. And this has nothing to do with literature, I should qualify. So he was born into a middle-class family. I should say, mostly it was a lower middle-class family in all its probability. And his father was a small-time farmer and a caretaker for another richer family, much richer family. My father, being the youngest, he had 11 brothers and sisters, and 2 of them died. So he grew up playing not with his siblings, but with his nieces and nephews. And he had everybody, being the youngest, they treated him with affection and love. And he grew up playing with not just his relatives, nieces and nephews, but also with other people in the village. He was born and raised in a small village in the outskirts of another smaller town, much smaller than Thrissur, named Kodungalur. And so that's where he was born. And the he had a lot of friends, and I remember he had all kinds of friends. I remember distinctly, the village mute, he couldn't talk. He was his classmate and a close friend. And so they would talk, and I did not quite understand how they were communicating, but they would sit there and talk. And then similarly, there was another guy who people said was mad, but my father said he was just a little eccentric. But anyway, he had friends from all walks of life. And so then at some time in 60s, as chance would have it, he got a job as a lecturer and then left his village. And at around the same time, he also got married and he morphed into being a family man. But I should say, the traits, his old village and the older self, the older playful traits never really left him. So he carried it wherever he went. And this introduction to the college, I'm segueing to another topic here. And this is my first-hand witness because I grew up, I was there, and I saw this. I saw him and observed him and shared with him as a family member. And I'm sure there is another side, his friends and colleagues got to watch, and in which I was not a part of. But as a lecturer and as a professor, he kind of got introduced into and morphed into this college man, but still had the village in him. And he at every opportunity he went back and he reconnected, which is like once every few weeks. Where we were living, it's not very far off. It's only about 40 miles, 30 miles. So he went back every 2 weeks or so, and then he reconnected and again got involved with all his friends. He played with the kids in the village, swam with them, and did all kinds of monkey business. The college, on the other hand, was not just a job for him, and the college for the family, it was not just a livelihood. For us, it was the college. It was a very organic thing. He got transferred, being a junior lecturer, he got transferred during the initial years of his career. He got transferred, I think, like 6, 7 times in the first 10 years or so. And so he was all over the place. But the college, as far as we are concerned, this never really left him. It didn't matter if he's getting transferred and getting acquainted with a new context and new set of colleagues and students. But for us, the family, the college was a serious business. It was also a fun place. The college is where serious people talked about serious things. The college is where you got to eat from a restaurant every day, and not just that, sometimes the food got brought to you. And then the colleges where they had a badminton court. The college is where there was competition. And my father used to tell us all these stories about what happened in the college and what kind of people are around him, how he was winning the competition, how he won a table tennis match against Professor Sahadevan, and he used his very special spin shot and tricked him into playing some impossible shots, all of that. And how he won the running competition happened in the college. And so college was a very special place for us, the college. The people from the college, mostly his colleagues and grown-ups, they also behaved very differently. They did not speak Malayalam like we did. They spoke a prescriptive language. They did not drink tea from a steel cup. They sipped the tea slowly and talked in between. They did not, the people in the college did not sit straight. They instead sat there and crossed their legs and contemplated. And so the college was different. And my father also, I should say, when he spoke with the people in the college, he changed his Malayalam accent a little bit, and so as to make it more prescriptive. Now, even the students were different in the college. They all looked like 8 feet tall. They were all big, much bigger, and they all had beards, and they all had very harsh, baritone kind of voice. And there was this guy who called himself Tacholi Ambu. His real name was Devdas. There was another guy who was trying to impress the girls by paying a bus full of girls their fare for the bus. So in fact, my father was actually friends with a lot of his students. The college was not like the colleges I went to later on. My colleges did not have this aura of being very grown up and very serious like, and very pensive and contemplating. My friends in my colleges were ordinary people, but not in these colleges. And alluding to you, the audience. I hope I did not paint a lesser picture of my father. He was also definitely into books. He could sit there, something I cannot do even now, particularly in the days of internet. My father could sit there and he read 4 or 5 hours every day religiously. And many years later, I would try to go through the books, and I could not understand till this day. There is not even a subject that I could even pretend that I'm understanding, because I don't. My father was friends amongst my friends, my own friends, my brother's friends. My father was a friend as well. My father would play chess. My father would play goalie, marbles, with my friends. And he would try to improve the game, and a lot of my friends would be in my house trying to play, and my father will be in one team, and there'll be a bunch of other kids in all around, and he was a champion amongst the kids in caroms, and he taught me caroms. So that's all I want to say. I miss my dad terribly. I wish I could buy him a record player, which he wanted. I wish I could take him to Ireland. He was very much and Irish culture, and he told me about used to speak to me about the Gaelic language and their culture. So yes, that's my that's my my little something off my chest. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
I have nothing more.
Thank you.